So, in the next few months, we could witness something that has never, ever happened before in all of human history. One single person is projected to be worth $1 trillion. Today, we are going to do the math. We're going to break down how that's even possible, and it's a story that leads right to the doorstep of what might be the largest and most anticipated IPO of all time.
And you know what's really wild? This exact moment was basically predicted, almost to the year, half a century ago. Back in 1976, the legendary comic book artist Jack Kirby was imagining a future with these tech titans who were so powerful they'd become like space gods. What sounded like a crazy comic book fantasy back then? Well, it's pretty much our financial reality right now.
So, that's the big question, right? How on earth is it possible for one person to be worth 12 figures, $1,000 billion? That's what we're going to unpack today. Let's get into it. Okay, so to even begin to wrap our heads around a number that massive, we've got to clear something up first. There's a huge misconception about how extreme wealth actually works. It has very little to do with cash sitting in a bank account and everything to do with something called net worth. Yeah, you can forget that mental image of someone swimming in a vault of gold coins. A massive net worth isn't a bank balance. It's almost entirely tied up in the value of the assets they own. And for people at this level, that almost always means one thing: shares in the companies they founded. Here's a super simple way to think about it. Imagine you own a house. And let's say the housing market goes crazy and suddenly your house is worth $1 million. Boom, you're technically a millionaire on paper. But you don't actually have $1 million in cash, right? To get that money, you'd have to sell the house. It's the exact same idea for billionaires, except their house is their company's stock. So if it's all about company stock, which company are we talking about? What's the engine behind this $1 trillion number? Now, you might be thinking it's Tesla, but surprisingly, it's not. It's SpaceX. So let's look at the journey. SpaceX was founded way back in 2002 with a goal that just sounded insane to everyone at the time: make humanity a multi-planetary species. And for years, man, they struggled. But then they started landing rockets and reusing them, something nobody else could figure out how to do. Before you knew it, they were flying NASA astronauts to the space station. And now, in 2026, they're gearing up for their biggest mission yet: going public. So what's their secret sauce? How did they do it? Well, it really boils down to one key business strategy: vertical integration. You see, while all their competitors were relying on this slow, complicated global web of suppliers for every little part, SpaceX just decided, you know what, we're going to build pretty much everything ourselves right here. And the difference is just, it's night and day. The old way of building rockets is incredibly slow and unbelievably expensive. But because SpaceX builds over 90% of its own parts, they can move way faster, they can innovate constantly, and they can slash costs like you wouldn't believe. It gives them complete and total control. But the real game changer, the thing that poured rocket fuel on the fire, was the merger in early 2026 with xAI, Musk's artificial intelligence company. All of a sudden, Wall Street stopped seeing just a rocket company. They started seeing an AI company and a space company fused into one. And in today's market, that combination of AI and heavy-duty infrastructure, that's what investors are willing to pay a massive, massive premium for. Okay, so you've got this disruptive business model. You've got this hot AI story. But where does a valuation of over $1 trillion actually come from? Let's dig into the numbers. Let's deconstruct this thing. Now, this is the part that I think most people get wrong about SpaceX. They are not just a rocket company anymore. I mean, just look at their 2025 numbers. Over 2/3 of their money is now coming from Starlink, their satellite internet business. See, launching rockets is great, but it's a one-off project. Internet service? That's a monthly bill. That's recurring revenue. They're basically building a global utility, and that is a much, much more valuable business in the eyes of investors. So let's look at the financial engine powering all of this. In 2025, the company pulled in a whopping $16 billion in total revenue. And that revenue is being driven by absolutely explosive growth. The Starlink subscriber base literally doubled year over year, hitting over 9 million people. That kind of growth is just incredible. But here's the real kicker. This is the number that makes Wall Street's jaw drop. They're doing all this with an estimated 50% EBITDA margin. Now, EBITDA is just a fancy way of measuring a company's operating profit. And 50%? You just don't see that in an industrial company. That's a software company number. That's a Microsoft number. And that insane profitability is exactly why it's getting this crazy tech-style valuation. Okay, so the financial picture looks incredibly strong, right? But it all leads to this huge debate raging on Wall Street right now. Is this company really worth almost $2 trillion? Let's look at the bull case versus the bear case.
So the bulls, the optimists, they point to Starlink's unstoppable growth, the powerful AI angle, and the fact that they have a near monopoly on launching things into space. The bears, though, they're pumping the brakes hard. They're saying this valuation is driven by pure FOMO, fear of missing out. I mean, to put it in perspective, this would value SpaceX at a much higher multiple than a proven cash machine like Apple. And they point to a huge key man risk. What happens to this whole thing if something happens to Musk?
But hey, whatever you think of the debate, here's the simple math that gets us the headline. Musk owns about 42% of SpaceX. So if this IPO hits its target valuation of $1.75 trillion, his piece of the pie is worth $735 billion. You add in his other stuff, like his Tesla stock, and he sails right past that trillion-dollar mark. In fact, there's so much room here, he could probably cross that line even if the IPO price is a bit below the target.
Okay, so we've talked about these huge astronomical numbers for Wall Street, but what about for the rest of us? What does all this mean for you, the retail investor, if you're thinking about maybe getting a piece of this action?
Well, to understand how you might be able to invest, you've got to know the basic IPO process. It goes like this. First, a company files a document called an S-1, which is where they open up their books to the public. Then, the execs go on what's called a roadshow to sell big institutional investors on the stock. Based on how much demand there is, they set the final price. And then, finally, comes the first day of trading, when the stock is available for anyone to buy. But here's what could make this IPO really different. See, normally, getting to buy shares at that initial IPO price, that's a privilege saved for the big Wall Street firms. But this time around, brokerages that focus on everyday investors, places like Robinhood and Moomoo, are apparently fighting to get a chunk of those shares specifically for their customers, something Musk himself seems to be in favor of. Of course, before the IPO, you can't just go and buy SpaceX stock directly. So people are finding some pretty creative ways to get what they call proxy exposure. This could mean buying special ETFs that actually own private shares of SpaceX already, like DYXY, or you could invest in its public partners, like Google, or even in its closest public competitor, Rocket Lab. And all of this, it brings us right back to that trillion-dollar question. When you look at the revolutionary tech, the near monopoly on space, the mind-blowing financials, could this SpaceX IPO actually be the single greatest investment opportunity of this decade? Or when you look at the absolutely unprecedented valuation, all the hype, and the massive risks that come with both space travel and artificial intelligence, are we just looking at the biggest bubble we've ever seen? That, right there, is a debate we are all about to watch play out.